"You picked the wrong woman." The words came out calm, almost too calm for a room full of people holding their breath. Travis Cole had Grace Mitchell pinned against the glass wall of the visitor center at Naval Station, Norfolk. One arm locked around her shoulder, the other buried deep inside the pocket of his gray field jacket. His face was slick with sweat. His jaw twitched every few seconds. Behind him, 30 civilians and sailors stood frozen between rows of plastic chairs, metal detectors, and half-finished cups of morning coffee. "One more step," Travis shouted, dragging Grace closer to his chest. "One more step, and she comes with me." The young gate guard stopped where he stood, his pistol half raised, uncertainty written all over his face. He could not have been more than 22. Too young to hide fear. Too inexperienced to know when a room had already changed hands. Grace saw it all. The guard's trembling finger. The receptionist crying behind the counter. The security camera blinking red above the entrance. The emergency exit 12 feet to her left. Travis's weight sitting too far back on his heels. Most people saw a hostage. Grace saw angles. She did not struggle. She did not scream. She did not beg. Her dark blonde hair had slipped loose from its low tie, brushing against the collar of her navy civilian jacket. A thin line of coffee stained one sleeve where Travis had knocked the cup from her hand. To anyone watching, she looked like another visitor caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. That was the mistake. Travis tightened his grip. "Tell them to lower their weapons." Grace's eyes moved once to the woman behind the desk, Emily Parker, who had been Travis's first hostage only seconds earlier. Emily was shaking so badly she could barely stand. Grace had stepped forward just enough to make herself visible, just enough to give Travis a different target. He had taken the bait. "Tell them," Travis hissed again. Grace turned her head slightly, not enough to provoke him, just enough for him to hear her. "You still have time to let everyone walk out of here." He laughed in her ear, a broken, desperate sound. "You think you're negotiating with me?" "No," Grace said softly. "I'm giving you a chance." For a moment, the only sound in the room was the low hum of fluorescent lights and the distant thud of boots outside the building. Someone was crying into their sleeve. Someone else whispered a prayer. Then Grace saw Commander Aaron Hayes enter through the far corridor. He stopped cold. His eyes found Grace. Recognition hit him like a physical blow. "Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in courage and respect, hit like and subscribe. These stories inspire change. And we're glad you're here." Now back to Grace. 12 minutes earlier, no one had noticed her. Grace Mitchell had walked into the visitor center alone, dressed in plain clothes, carrying a sealed envelope under one arm and a cooling cup of black coffee in her hand. She had spent the last 48 hours moving through places that did not appear on maps, aboard aircraft that did not file flight plans, under orders that would never be discussed in public. Now she stood in line behind a Navy wife with 2 children and an elderly man wearing a Vietnam veteran cap. The young sailor at the front desk glanced at Grace and smiled politely. "Visiting someone on base, ma'am?" Grace looked up. For half a second, something almost like amusement touched her face. "Yes," she said. "Something like that." 12 minutes before Travis Cole put his hands on her, Grace Mitchell stood in the visitor line like everyone else. No uniform, no visible rank, no polished metals catching the fluorescent light. Just a navy jacket, faded jeans, and boots that had seen too much salt water to look new. Her dark blonde hair was tied low at the back of her neck, and the sealed envelope under her left arm looked ordinary enough that nobody gave it a second glance. That was how Grace preferred it. There were people who needed to be seen to feel powerful. Grace had spent most of her adult life learning the opposite. The quieter she moved, the longer she lived. The less attention she drew, the more she noticed. The visitor center at Naval Station Norfolk was already filling with morning traffic. A Navy wife tried to keep 2 restless children from climbing over the plastic chairs. An old veteran in a weathered cap leaned on his cane and studied the wall of command photographs. A civilian contractor argued softly with a clerk about a misplaced access badge. Grace watched without appearing to watch. The front doors, the side hallway, the position of the guards, the camera above the metal detector, blinking red once every 3 seconds. The emergency exit near the vending machines with a scuffed handle and no visible alarm seal. Small things. Most people ignored them because nothing had happened yet. Grace never waited for something to happen before she started paying attention. The young sailor at the desk looked up when she reached the counter. His name tag read Brooks. He had clean boots, nervous eyes, and the careful politeness of someone still trying to prove he belonged in the uniform. "Good morning, ma'am," he said. "Visiting someone on base?" Grace slid her identification across the counter. "Commander Hayes." Brooks glanced at the card, then at her plain clothes. His eyebrows moved slightly before he caught himself. He knew better than to question the identification, but he was young enough to let confusion show on his face. "Are you family, ma'am?" Grace almost smiled. "Not exactly." He typed her name into the system. The computer hesitated longer than it should have. Grace noticed the delay. Brooks noticed that she noticed it. "System's been slow all morning," he said quickly. Grace nodded once. "It happens." He looked relieved, as if her patience had spared him a reprimand. He printed a visitor badge and reached for it, then stopped when a warning box flashed on his screen. His posture changed. Not much. Just enough. "Ma'am, I may need to call this in." Grace leaned closer, lowering her voice so the family behind her would not hear. "Call Commander Hayes directly." Brooks swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." While he reached for the phone, Grace turned slightly and let her eyes drift across the room again. The veteran was still by the wall. The children were still restless. The contractor had stopped arguing and was now checking his watch too often. Then she saw the man near the front entrance. Gray field jacket. Heavy collar. Right hand buried in his pocket though the room was warm. Jaw clenched. Eyes moving, not searching for a person, but searching for a way out. Grace's face did not change. But inside, every quiet part of her woke up. The first mistake was the camera. It sat above the main entrance, angled down toward the metal detector, its small red light blinking like a heartbeat. To everyone else, it looked active. To Grace, it looked wrong. The lens had been nudged 2 inches off center, just enough to leave a blind strip along the right side of the lobby. The second mistake was the emergency exit. Its handle was scuffed from recent use, but the security seal that should have crossed the latch was missing. No one had replaced it. No one had noticed. A base this large ran on thousands of small details, and when the small details started failing, the big ones were never far behind. Grace kept her body relaxed. Petty Officer Brooks still had the phone pressed to his ear, waiting for Commander Hayes' office to answer. His eyes flicked from the screen to Grace, then back again. He knew something about her identification had triggered the system, but he did not know enough to understand what kind of person was standing in front of him. That was fine. Knowing too much could make young sailors nervous. Nervous hands made bad decisions. Grace shifted half a step away from the counter, giving herself a wider view of the visitor center. The morning crowd moved in ordinary patterns. People checked phones. Children complained. A coffee machine hissed near the wall. A sailor laughed too loudly at something his friend had said. Ordinary noise could hide dangerous silence. The man in the gray field jacket had stopped pretending to wait. He stood near the front doors with his shoulders hunched and his chin tucked down, but his eyes were working too hard. Left to right, door to desk, guard to hallway, vending machines to exit. Not the way a lost visitor searched for help. The way a desperate man measured distance. Grace saw his right hand again. Still in the pocket. Not relaxed. Braced. The visitor center had 2 armed guards that morning. One was near the entrance, speaking with an older couple about parking passes. The other stood by the screening lane, checking bags as they passed through the scanner. Both were doing their jobs. Neither was doing enough. Grace did not blame them. Most security failures were not born from laziness. They were born from routine. 100 peaceful mornings taught a person to expect the 101st to be peaceful too. Grace had learned that the enemy loved routine. Brooks lowered the phone slightly. "Commander Hayes' office is transferring me, ma'am." "Keep trying," Grace said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried a weight Brooks did not miss. He nodded and lifted the phone again. The man in the gray jacket moved. Only 3 steps. To the average person, it was nothing. A man shifting position. A restless visitor tired of waiting. But Grace saw the timing. He moved when the guard by the entrance turned his head. He moved when the scanner belt jammed and the second guard leaned down to fix it. He moved when the room's attention broke into pieces. Grace set her coffee on the counter. Slowly, Brooks noticed. "Ma'am." Grace did not answer. The man stopped beside Emily Parker, the civilian receptionist at the information desk. Emily was young, maybe 26, with tired eyes and a wedding ring she kept twisting while she worked. She looked up at him with professional patience. "Sir, can I help you?" For 1 second, he said nothing. Then his face changed. The mask fell away. His left hand shot across the desk and grabbed Emily by the collar before she could even rise from her chair. A scream tore through the lobby. The coffee machine kept hissing. A child started crying. The guard spun toward the sound, but the man already had Emily pulled against him. His right hand came out of his pocket. Metal flashed. "Everybody back," he shouted. The room froze. Grace did not move. Not yet. Travis Cole did not look like a man who had planned to die that morning. He looked like a man who had run out of places to put his rage. His face was pale under the harsh visitor center lights. Sweat darkened the collar of his gray field jacket. The hand gripping Emily Parker's uniform blouse shook so badly that the metal in his other hand flickered in and out of the light. "Back up," he screamed. "All of you, back up now." The two guards froze with their weapons drawn, but not aimed cleanly. Too many civilians stood between them and the threat. Too many angles crossed the room. A wrong shot would turn one bad decision into a tragedy that would never leave this base. Grace saw the calculation hit them. They were trained, but young. Travis was close enough to Emily that her feet barely touched the floor. Her hands clawed at his wrist, not to fight him, just to breathe. A thin gold chain at her neck had snapped loose and hung against her collarbone. Her eyes searched the room for someone older, stronger, someone in charge. They passed over Grace. That was good. Grace wanted to stay invisible a little longer. Petty Officer Brooks stood behind the counter, the phone still in his hand, his mouth slightly open. The line had gone quiet. Somewhere on the other end, Commander Hayes's office was probably asking him to repeat himself. He could not. Nobody could. Travis dragged Emily away from the desk and back toward the side hallway. "I want Hayes," he shouted. "I want him standing right here. No guards. No lies. No more hiding behind paperwork." The name moved through the room like a cold draft. Grace watched his grip, watched his breathing, watched the way he kept glancing at the hallway instead of the front doors. He was not just trying to escape. He wanted an audience. He wanted someone in command to admit that he mattered. That made him dangerous in a different way. A desperate man who wanted to live could be negotiated with. A humiliated man who wanted to be seen could destroy a room just to prove he existed. "Sir," one guard said carefully, "let the woman go and we can talk." Travis laughed, sharp and ugly. "Talk. That's what you people do. You talk. You file reports. You bury names. You throw a man out and call him a security risk like that makes it clean." Grace knew enough from his words to understand the shape of him. Former contractor. Removed from access. Blamed the military. Blamed the command. Blamed everyone except the man holding an innocent woman by the throat. Emily let out a small sound. Not a scream. Worse. A weakening breath. That was when Grace stepped forward. Only one step. Brooks saw her move and whispered, "Ma'am, don't." Travis's eyes snapped toward her. "You deaf." Grace stopped beside the counter, hands open, shoulders low. Nothing aggressive. Nothing heroic. Just a quiet woman in a navy jacket, standing where fear had made everyone else smaller. "She can't breathe," Grace said. Travis blinked, thrown by the steadiness of her voice. Grace nodded toward Emily. "You wanted Hayes. Hurting her won't bring him faster." For the first time, Travis truly looked at Grace. He saw plain clothes, tired eyes, a coffee stain on her sleeve. No rank, no weapon, no threat he could understand. Exactly what Grace needed him to see. His grip shifted. Emily gasped. Travis pointed at Grace with a trembling chin. "You, come here." The room seemed to stop breathing. Grace did not look at the guards. She did not look at Brooks. She only looked at Emily and gave the smallest nod. Then she stepped forward. Grace walked slowly, the way people move when a sudden sound might shatter glass. Every eye in the visitor center followed her. Petty Officer Brooks stood behind the counter with the phone pressed uselessly against his ear. The young guards tracked her with fear in their faces, both of them understanding that she was either saving Emily Parker's life or making herself the next victim. To Travis Cole, she looked obedient. That was the first thing he misunderstood. "Hands where I can see them," he barked. Grace lifted both hands slightly, palms open, fingers relaxed. No sudden movement. No challenge in her posture. She gave him exactly what a frightened man expected from a woman he thought he could control. He shoved Emily forward. The receptionist stumbled, caught herself against the counter, and fell to her knees behind it. Her breath came in sharp, broken pieces. A guard moved half a step toward her. "Don't!" Travis snapped. The guard stopped. Grace kept walking. Closer now, she could smell stale coffee on Travis's breath, old sweat in his jacket, and the faint chemical sharpness of panic. His pupils were too wide. His breathing came high in his chest. His grip was strong, but unfocused. Strength without discipline. Anger without control. Those were not advantages. They were openings. "Turn around," Travis ordered. Grace obeyed. Slowly. He grabbed her left wrist first, twisting it behind her back. Not tight enough to control a trained operator. Tight enough to hurt someone he believed was helpless. Then he hooked his other arm across her upper chest and pulled her against him. The room reacted with a quiet wave of horror. Grace heard a woman whisper, "Oh God." She heard Emily sobbing behind the counter. She heard Brooks say something under his breath that sounded like a prayer. Grace did not hear fear inside herself. There was only math. His right foot was behind hers. His elbow was too high. His balance leaned toward the hallway. His weapon hand kept drifting away from her body each time he looked at the guards. He had taken a hostage, but he had not secured control. He only thought he had. "See," Travis shouted to the room. "This is what happens when nobody listens. This is what happens when you throw people away." Grace looked at the reflection in the glass wall ahead of her. Through it, she could see his face beside hers, twisted with rage and humiliation. She could see the guards frozen near the entrance. She could see civilians crouched between chairs. She could see the emergency exit to the left, still clear. "Not yet." Travis tightened his arm. "You married to somebody on base?" Grace said nothing. He jerked her wrist higher. "I asked you a question." "No," Grace said. "Then what are you? Some secretary? Some officer's wife? You people all look the same when you're scared." A few people in the room flinched. Grace did not. His words passed over her like wind over steel. "You should let them leave," she said. Travis laughed close to her ear. "You don't give orders here." "No," Grace said. "Not to you." Something in her tone made him pause. Only for a second. But Grace felt it. The first crack. At the far end of the corridor, footsteps approached. Measured. Fast, but controlled. Commander Aaron Hayes appeared with 2 security personnel behind him. His face was hard, professional, until his eyes landed on Grace. Then everything changed. Recognition cut through him. He stopped so abruptly that one of the security men nearly bumped into his shoulder. Travis saw the reaction. "Hayes," he shouted. "You finally decided to show up." Grace's eyes met the commander's in the glass reflection. Hayes started to speak. Grace gave the smallest shake of her head. "Do not reveal it. Do not rush him. Not while civilians were still in the line of fire." Travis pulled her backward toward the side hallway, using her body like a shield. "Everybody stays where they are. She's coming with me." Grace let him move her 2 steps. Only 2. Enough to draw him away from Emily. Enough to open space between Travis and the crowd. Enough to put his weight exactly where she needed it. Then she spoke, barely above a whisper. "Last chance, Travis." His arm stiffened. For the first time, he wondered how she knew his name. Travis Cole froze for half a breath. It was small enough that most people missed it. The guards still saw the weapon. The civilians still saw the hostage. Petty Officer Brooks still saw a quiet woman being dragged toward the side hallway by a man who had already crossed too many lines. But Grace felt the hesitation through his arm. Fear had finally entered the room from his side. "How do you know my name?" Travis snapped. Grace kept her eyes on the glass reflection. She could see Commander Hayes standing 20 feet away, one hand slightly raised to hold his security team back. His face had gone pale in a way only a few people would understand. Not panic. Recognition. He knew what Grace was capable of. He also knew why she had not moved yet. Too many civilians. Too many bad angles. Too many young hands trying to help before they understood the room. Grace's voice stayed low. "You said you wanted Hayes. I asked how you knew my name. You said enough." Travis pulled her another step backward, toward the hallway where the emergency exit waited in the blind strip beneath the shifted camera. He thought he was finding his escape. Grace let him think that. A desperate man needed something to believe he controlled. "Don't play with me," he said. "You don't know anything about what they did." Grace's eyes moved to Emily, still kneeling behind the counter, one hand pressed to her throat. The young receptionist was alive. Shaken, but alive. That mattered. "I know you let her go." Grace said. Travis barked a laugh. Because I chose to. No, Grace said. Because I asked. The words were quiet. They landed hard. A murmur passed through the room, then died immediately. Travis tightened his arm across her chest, trying to recover the power he felt slipping away. You think you're brave, he hissed. You think standing there with that calm little voice makes you special? Grace did not answer. He wanted emotion. Anger. Fear. Proof that he could still reach her. She gave him nothing. Commander Hayes took half a step forward. Travis, listen to me. Shut up. Travis shouted. You don't talk until I say you talk. Hayes stopped. Grace met his eyes again in the glass. Still not yet. Brooks watched the silent exchange and began to understand that something was wrong with what he had assumed. Commander Hayes was not looking at Grace like a helpless civilian. He was looking at her like a locked weapon he was afraid someone else had just touched. Travis jerked his chin toward the hallway. We're leaving. She's my insurance. Grace finally turned her head just enough for him to hear her clearly. She is not your insurance. He frowned. What? She, Grace said, meaning herself, is your last warning. For one strange second, the room seemed to go completely still. Even the fluorescent hum felt distant. Travis stared at her reflection, confused by the absence of fear. He had chosen her because she looked quiet, because she had stepped forward without a weapon, because he mistook restraint for weakness. Grace lowered her voice. Left hand or right hand? His grip shifted again. What did you say? The hand you want to keep using, she said. Choose. A cold silence spread across the lobby. Hayes closed his eyes for the briefest moment, as if he already knew what was coming and wished Travis had been smart enough to stop it. Travis shoved the weapon closer to her side. You're not in a position to threaten me. Grace looked at his reflection one last time. No, she said. You're just standing too close to understand it. Travis moved too fast for someone who was supposed to be in control. That was the first thing Grace noticed. Not the weapon. Not the shouting. Not the chaos blooming across the visitor center floor. It was the imbalance in his movement. The way his weight kept shifting too far forward, like a man trying to outrun his own decisions. He dragged her through the side corridor now, away from the main lobby. The emergency exit door was 10 steps ahead, partially hidden by a vending machine and a stack of supply crates. The blind strip under the shifted camera was right there. He thought he had chosen the path. Grace let him believe it. Move, Travis barked, pulling her harder. Grace took a step that looked like compliance. Another step that looked like hesitation. Her shoulders stayed relaxed, her breathing steady. To anyone watching, she was being controlled. But she was counting. 1, 2, 3. Distance to the corner, shrinking. Distance to the exit, optimal. Distance between Travis's elbow and her rib line, unstable. Behind them, the visitor center felt distant now. The guards were shouting orders, but their voices were muffled by concrete walls and adrenaline. Commander Hayes's presence was somewhere back in the main hall, held in place by his own restraint. He knew what would happen if this moved too early. Travis shoved her toward the wall near the exit corridor. Stay there, he snapped. Stay exactly. Grace stopped. Perfect position. He tightened his grip instinctively, thinking she was obeying, thinking he had finally forced control into place. That was the second mistake. Travis lifted the weapon slightly, scanning the hallway beyond the door. Nobody comes in, he shouted again. Nobody tries anything. I swear his sentence broke. Because Grace was no longer where she had been a fraction of a second earlier. She had dropped her center of gravity. Not forward. Not backward. Into him. Her left hand guided his wrist, not ripping, not striking, redirecting. Her shoulder turned under his arm in a smooth, controlled rotation that stole leverage instead of fighting it. His balance collapsed before his mind registered what his body had already lost. The weapon clattered once against the wall. Metal on concrete. A sound too small for what it meant. Travis tried to tighten his grip again, but his elbow was already displaced. His stance, once aggressive, was now hollow. He pivoted too late, chasing a target that had already moved inside his space. Grace finished the movement without urgency. A twist. A lock. A control drop. Travis hit the floor hard, breath knocked out of him, arm pinned in a position that made resistance impossible without injury. The weapon slid 2 feet away and stopped near the base of the wall, out of reach. For half a second, the corridor went silent. No shouting. No movement. Even the distant chaos from the lobby seemed to pause. Grace stood over him, still breathing evenly, adjusting nothing on her clothing. Her expression did not change. Not satisfaction, not anger, just completion. Travis coughed, trying to process what had happened. What? What are you? Boot steps filled the corridor. Fast. Controlled. Multiple. Commander Aaron Hayes appeared first, followed by armed security. He took one look at the situation, Travis on the ground, the weapon secured, Grace standing exactly where she had been trained to stand in moments like this, and immediately raised his hand. Stand down, he ordered sharply. The guards hesitated. Hayes didn't. I said stand down. They obeyed. Travis looked up at Grace, confusion turning into something closer to realization. Hayes stepped forward, his voice lower now, careful. Nobody touch her. A beat of silence. Then Hayes said it, clearly, for everyone in the corridor to hear. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell. The words hit the space like a physical force. Travis stopped moving entirely. For the first time, he looked at her properly, not as a hostage, not as an object, not as a mistake, but as something he should have recognized before he ever reached for her. Grace did not look down at him. She was already scanning the room again, because the situation was over. But control always came with one final responsibility, and she was still on duty. For a moment after the weapon hit the floor, no one in the corridor moved. It wasn't hesitation anymore. It was understanding catching up to reality. Travis Cole lay pinned against the concrete, one arm locked in a position that made even small resistance impossible. His breathing came in sharp, broken pulse. The rage that had carried him this far was still there, but it no longer had structure. It was just noise trapped inside a collapsing body. Grace stood over him, still, centered, unshaken. Commander Aaron Hayes broke the silence first. Secure the weapon, he ordered. A security officer stepped forward, careful, almost reluctant, and picked up the dropped firearm from the edge of the hallway. Another moved to Travis, checking his condition, confirming restraint rather than injury. But no one touched Grace. Not because they were afraid of Travis. Because they understood what they were standing next to. Hayes took a slow step closer. His eyes stayed on Grace's face for a long second before shifting briefly to the corridor behind her, as if confirming the situation had truly ended. You could have ended it sooner, he said quietly. Grace didn't look at him immediately. She adjusted her stance slightly, scanning once more toward the main lobby, where distant shouting still echoed through the walls like fading weather. There were civilians in the line of fire, she replied. That was all. No justification. No emotion. Just fact. Behind them, Emily Parker was finally being helped to her feet. Her hands were still shaking, but she was breathing. A medic spoke softly to her, guiding her away from the counter. Petty Officer Brooks stood frozen at the desk, the phone still in his hand, as if he had forgotten what it was meant to do. He kept looking at Grace, like he was trying to rewrite everything he thought he understood about the last 10 minutes. Travis laughed suddenly from the floor. It wasn't a real laugh. It was the sound of someone realizing too late that they were never in control of the story. You were military, he muttered. All that time. Grace finally looked down at him. Not with anger. Not with satisfaction. Just clarity. Yes, she said. The single word landed heavier than anything he had shouted before. Travis shook his head slightly, still processing, still resisting the collapse of his own assumptions. They should have told me. No, Grace interrupted, calm. You should have stopped. Silence again. Hayes gestured once, and the security team began to move Travis toward detention. No struggle now. No resistance worth mentioning. Just procedure returning to a system that had briefly failed. As they passed, one of the younger guards glanced at Grace. He looked like he wanted to say something. He didn't. He didn't have the words for it yet. When the corridor finally cleared, the noise from the visitor center felt distant again, like a separate world trying to reassemble itself. Hayes turned slightly toward Grace. His voice lowered. This will go through review. I know, she said. A pause. Then he added, quieter, almost reluctant. You stayed too long in a compromised position. Grace met his eyes for the first time fully. I stayed long enough, she said, for everyone else to leave it. That ended the conversation. Not because it was complete, but because there was nothing left to argue against. Grace turned away first. Not in dismissal. In reset. She walked back toward the main hall where the ordinary world was slowly returning to its shape. People confused, shaken, but alive. And behind her, For the first time since the moment Travis Cole chose the wrong woman, no one in the room questioned what they had just seen. They only remembered one thing. She never raised her voice. She never needed to. The visitor center at Naval Station Norfolk did not feel the same anymore. It still had the same fluorescent hum, the same polished floors, the same rows of plastic chairs where civilians waited for access badges and delayed appointments. But something invisible had shifted inside the space, like air after a storm that nobody had officially announced. People moved differently now, slower, more aware. As Grace Mitchell stepped back into the main hall, she could feel eyes following her, not with panic anymore, but with the heavy silence of people trying to understand what they had just survived without fully seeing it happen. Behind her, the corridor remained secured. Travis Cole was gone from sight, taken into custody. The weapon was gone. The immediate threat had dissolved, but the memory of it had not. Emily Parker sat near the side wall, wrapped in a gray emergency blanket. A medic spoke gently to her, but she wasn't really listening. Her eyes kept drifting back toward the hallway, as if expecting reality to repeat itself. Petty Officer Brooks stood a few feet away, still holding the phone he had forgotten to hang up. The line had gone dead minutes ago, but he hadn't moved. His expression wasn't fear now. It was recalibration, like his mind was rebuilding the entire world from the moment he first saw Grace and realizing every assumption had been wrong. Commander Aaron Hayes approached slowly, not like a superior officer approaching a subordinate, like a man approaching a threshold he had crossed many times before, but never quite like this. "You're clear," he said quietly. Grace nodded once. "Civilians? All accounted for," Hayes replied. A pause followed. Not uncomfortable, just full. Hayes looked at her for a long moment, then finally spoke again. "You know this will get reviewed." "I expected it," Grace said. He exhaled through his nose, almost imperceptibly. "They're going to ask why you engaged instead of waiting for tactical response." Grace's eyes drifted across the room, toward Emily, toward Brooks, toward the guards still holding positions they had not yet relaxed from. "Because waiting wasn't an option," she said. Hayes didn't argue. He couldn't. In the distance, the visitor center began to return to itself. Voices slowly rose again. Chairs shifted. Someone tried to laugh and failed halfway through. The system, as it always did, started to repair its own illusion of normality. But nothing was normal anymore for the people who had seen too much. Brooks finally stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said, voice uncertain. I didn't recognize," he stopped, because there was no way to finish that sentence without sounding smaller than he already felt. Grace turned slightly toward him. "You didn't need to recognize anything," she said. "Your job was to keep the room stable. You did that. It wasn't praise. It wasn't dismissal. It was accounting." Brooks nodded anyway, as if that was enough to keep him standing. Hayes gestured subtly toward the exit corridor. "Debrief will be formal. Medical check first." Grace understood the order behind the words. She gave a single nod. Before she turned, she glanced once more at the visitor center, at the civilians who would leave here remembering fragments, at the guards who would replay every second trying to find where it could have gone differently, at the quiet machinery of a base that had almost broken under a single man's collapse. Then she walked, not away from the incident, but through it, because for Grace Mitchell, there was no after yet. Only the next place where someone would assume the wrong thing about the wrong person. And next time, there would be no hesitation at all. Behind her, Commander Hayes spoke quietly, so only Brooks could hear. "That," he said, "was why she's not like the rest of us." Brooks didn't answer. He didn't need to. He already knew. Respect, he understood now, had never been something given by rank or uniform. It was something earned in seconds when everything else stopped working. And in that room, it had been earned by a woman no one had noticed until it was too late to ignore her.